welcome back to the Holy Grounds podcast. This is episode number 4, and we are finally back here at Coffee with a Twist. First and foremost, I want to thank Brandon, the guy who runs the place, for allowing us to come and chill in this nice little quiet room on this really comfy couch to do all this. So Brandon, if you're watching, thank you. And today, we are... I mean, I could go thank him.
Thanks.
Thank you. No. But
We're going to do this.
Are we just supposed
we're
to
just
awkwardly
gonna
say?
sit. Is this going on?
Hey, Brandon, my wife wants me to include this in the podcast. Thank you for letting us come and film here.
Awesome.
Also, you ever notice that, and keep this in, Austin, you ever notice that he never says my name? My name is Candace, by the way. I don't know if he's ever going to put that in the podcast.
So we are now in the 4th chapter of Ruth. The last chapter, I've got a New Revised Standard and a NASB 95. I know you've got the NASB 95 as well.
And I have an NIV study Bible.
NIV Study Bible Commentary, and you're working out of the
NASB.
I believe yours is 2020.
I don't know. And then an NIV just sitting there.
But I did do some reading through the King James when it comes to my notes, and there's something that I do want to discuss that I saw. And before we get into a lot of the great details, a couple things that I noticed. So we finally meet this kinsman that Boaz had mentioned, but I had noticed something really interesting about the beginning part here in chapter number 4. So if we go over to verse number 2, actually no, verse number 1, it all starts off right here in verse number 1. So let me pull up the King James Version. Then went Boaz up to the gate, and sat him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. There's this little callback in the King James that's not in any other translation that I can find, not even the New King James. So it's that part where the callback said, such a one. So as he's arriving, we're reminded of what he said about this kinsman prior to, but no other translation reads that. The New American, the NRSV, just simply read, Now sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there next to the next of kin, of whom Boaz had spoken, came passing by. So Boaz said, Come over, friend, sit down here. And he went over and sat down. That little callback is missing from every other translation. It's really interesting. But yeah, that's the big thing I had to start this whole thing off with. So, your turn, Patrick.
All right. So let's get back to verse 1 and 2. So, actually, before we even start breaking down verses, I have broken this chapter down pretty much into 3 parts. So the first part is we have the interaction between Boaz and the closer relative. That's 1 through 12. That is pretty much the majority of the start of this chapter, and it's a very important dialogue between them that we see. The next section is going to be the marriage of Ruth and how the line continues, and that's going to be verses 13 through 15. And then as we get to the end, we have the lineage, and we also call back Naomi for a second and talk about that. So let's talk about Boaz and that closer relative.
Just to show you all the difference between our notes, here's my notes, a singular page. And Patrick over here, rocking 1, 2, 3.
3 pages. Yay!
Last week when we came in to actually read chapter 4, I had gotten my notes done, and I said, all right, I'm good. And Patrick goes, I'm on verse 3. And he had a page. So, just a little side. I figured I'd want you guys to know how we structure our note system, but
let's talk about this relative. So verse 1 tells us that Boaz is going to go to the gate to wait on the closer relative. And so to understand the importance of this, you have to understand what the point of the gate was. So the city gate is kind of similar to what we would consider a city hall. So in our span of the world, we consider City Hall as the central hub, and then everything else is built around the City Hall. In these times, the city gate, which was around the city, was the central public and legal hub of the time. So this is where every type of transaction was going to take place. So if you wanted to go buy something, you would go to the city gate. If you needed to settle a dispute, you would go to the city gate. If you needed to handle city duties, you would go to the city gate. And this is where the elders are going to be, which is why it's also important that we talk about that in just a second. But during this time, we have to call back the Levirate law, which is that law that talks about when somebody dies, when a husband dies, the next person in line takes over. So let's pretend that there are two brothers. The oldest brother gets married, and the oldest brother dies, similar to the situation that we've seen through all of Ruth. It is then the responsibility of the next brother, the next of kin, to marry the wife and continue the name of the older brother. Well, he kind of had a choice, not really, but if she were to go to him and say, all right, you're up next, and he's like, no, she would go to the city gate to call the elders and then explain the situation of how the brother would not continue the line. The elders would then call in the brother, have the conversation. If he were to still decline his job of being the redeemer, the next of kin to continue the line, then, according to scripture, she can spit in his face. Interesting. Read that. But it's always the woman that initiates this at the city gate, so it's very interesting that we see Boaz being the one waiting for the closer relative. And so when the closer relative comes, Austin's already talked about that. He's like, hey, come over here. Now, we don't know anything about this closer relative. We don't know what type of relationship he was to the family. I'm going to assume that he would probably be more like a brother to Elimelech rather than a cousin, because we kind of think it would have to be closer than what Boaz is, and we can almost assume that Boaz is like a cousin. So there had to be some closer connection. Now, again, we also don't know if the closer relative is from this city. We don't know if he's coming in because maybe he finally caught wind that Elimelech is dead. He might not even know that Elimelech is dead. I mean, granted, Boaz probably didn't even realize it either when they all came back. So we have this situation where a closer relative comes. Boaz knows that he's the close relative, but we don't know if the close relative knows anything else that's going on at this time. So Boaz presents the situation. But before he does that, he gets the elders close, because that is going to be the official stamp on what's about to happen. So again, we can go back, we can see that the elders had to be involved in this type of transaction. They had to have some type of visual, some type of understanding so that they can say, yes, it happened exactly this way. Because again, if it was just two people, I could say one thing, you could say another thing, and we could never agree. So that's why the elders had to be there. Now, none of the scripture that I see dictated that it had to be a certain number. So I think it's interesting that they say that there were 10. He got 10 elders to sit there. Now, some of the research I did said 10 is considered a holy number. I couldn't find any proof of that either, but I'm not going to say that it wasn't important to the story. And maybe that's one of those questions we're not supposed to know right now. But the elders were there to do two things: witness the covenant, witness the marriage. That's what they were there to do. And it's kind of interesting that they were there to do those two things, because that's how Boaz interested to the relative. So in verse 3 and 4, then he said to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Bombshell. Boom. So verse 3, we get a bombshell. There's a closer relative. Boom. Ruth, Naomi, sad. Then we get here. Boaz is like, here's the problem. Naomi came back. Elimelech still has land. She can't afford it, so she's going to lose it unless one of us redeems it. And because you are the closer relative, and listen, and you all can check your translations too, he says, and before the elders of my people. So that again, that's kind of the drawing to me that maybe this relative was not from the land. Maybe he had moved. Maybe he was living somewhere else. There's no reason why he came back that we know here either. But he's presenting, Naomi has land. If you and I don't do something, she's going to lose it.
Do you think also that this other relative Boaz mentions maybe because he's wealthier than because Boaz is a pretty wealthy man in terms of like status. I'm not saying like just status alone. He is a wealthy individual because he has this command, this power, because Boaz calls a court. I put probably because he himself was one of the elders, because he is a rich man, possibly the father of the city, a city chief. His approach to the gate of the city is one of authority, which is very similar to Job chapter 29, verse 7. When I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the square. So there's this authority that he has here. Now, I'm not saying that these two verses are connected in any spiritual way, but there's that authority behind it. So we know that he has power of some sort.
And that's kind of where we end up. And again, we get that bombshell where he's like, yes, I will redeem it. But we got to understand why we think he said, yes, I will redeem it. So, again, Boaz is presenting the problem. You first, me next. And the elders had to be there to validate the answer that was about to come out of his mouth. Notice, Boaz says, Naomi. He says absolutely nothing about Ruth. Nothing. And so, if I was the closer relative, number one, I would know who Naomi is because I know who Elimelech is. Which kind of makes me believe that Elimelech probably has a good, decent amount of land. I mean, he didn't have to do it. If it was something small, not worthwhile, he could have been like, I don't want it. But he also realizes that Naomi is past childbearing age. He's only getting the land. And so he doesn't have any other responsibilities besides buying the land and taking the land. Mm. And this relative probably has his own family. He probably has his own kids. I mean, we don't know anything else beside that, but we can probably assume that he was probably set up wherever he was originally. And that's why in verse 5, Boaz drops the next bombshell. On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess.
In case you forgot.
In case you forgot.
The widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance.
Notice, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the first time that not only did they remind us that she's a Moabite, but did they just add something to her title there? Because previously, they just keep reminding her that she's Ruth the in other translations it just says the Moabite, but in this case the Moabitess, reminding us she's a woman. And every other time, they just call her Ruth the Moabitess.
Yeah, they mention that she's a widow.
Right, and now it's saying Ruth the Moabitess, the widow. So now we're adding something to her title here, not necessarily because to take pity, because it's not a pity party, but it's kind of showing us this reason of why she's in this situation. So now we're reminded of her past, and now we're slowly creeping into that title where she's no longer going to be reminded as Ruth the Moabitess, but spoilers, Ruth in the lineage of Christ.
Well, and I think he also said that because, I mean, if he would have been like Ruth the Israelite, okay, that's part of our people. Telling him that she's a Moabitess changes her stature in their eyes.
But it also, the good thing about knowing the lineage of Christ, it also shows us that Christ is for the Jew and the Gentile, because Christ's lineage actually comes from a mixture of the Jew and the Gentile.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. I also think it's interesting that they mention that she's a widow in this chapter after she goes through the process of being anointed, getting the new clothing, removing the widow status from her. They don't mention, they kind of mention it, but they don't refer to her as Ruth, the Moabitess, yada, yada, yada. They do it after she's already
Well, and
relinquish
also,
that status.
something that I thought about with this was, so she's having to raise, the Redeemer would have to raise up kids in honor of the deceased. So it would be Ruth's husband. Consequently, since Elimelech's kids are dead, he also would have to raise up a kid in the name of Elimelech. Because there is no one to take over the land with whoever decides to become the Goel, the Redeemer. There's no one to take over the land after that. So this descendant would also have to be, retrospectively considering, the descendant of Elimelech, because he has no kids now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this weird middle ground where it's like, yes, we're doing it for Ruth's husband, but also we have to do it for Elimelech because he has no kids to take over. He has no sons. And so we're going to talk about that because that's actually something I mentioned near the end of the chapter, because when you see Naomi's reaction with the child, you'll understand what I'm saying. But I'm assuming that he's saying this because they have to raise up a kid for Elimelech as well to take over. Because I don't think the law would have stated that he had to marry Ruth and have a kid. I mean, I understand from this, but he's specifically talking about the land of Naomi. So they're taking over. He's becoming the Goel for Naomi, but it's becoming for Ruth as well, which I think is why Ruth was also mentioned in this. So it's kind of like Elimelech's kid has to have a kid, but Elimelech has to have a kid as well. Mm. And so it's twofold, because the relative is going to take over as Elimelech's kid, but Elimelech doesn't have kids. It's very confusing. So he tells me he has to take up the name of the deceased, which granted, Elimelech and the two sons. And then we get to verse 6, and he simply says, I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. So notice, when it was just the land of Naomi, we were okay. Now we got the widow, who we have to continue the lineage of, and we can't do it. And so he talks about it jeopardizing the closer relatives' inheritance. So I'm going to flip back to Deuteronomy 23.
Why did you say
3.
Like that?
It's a hard word.
Deuteronomy. There's no extra T.
So it says, no Ammonite or Moabite, a.k.a. the two sons, who they're named after, shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord. So the closer relative is going to know this. And he's going to know that if he gets involved with a Moabitess, then it could impact his descendants, his inheritance, and his, essentially, relationship assembly with the Lord. Mm-hmm. So they're going to know that. I mean, everybody even the Moabites probably know that. But the Israelites definitely know that. Now, in front of the witnesses, he declares that he cannot redeem the land. Which, at that point, so again, he already redeemed it. Then we get the second part. Now he says, I can't do it. The elders have heard that. So now the transaction is now complete. So we understand.
Transaction is.
No, it's complete.
My bad. When you cut that part out.
No, we ain't.
The elders hear this. And so then we move to the next phase. And this is just a cool little tidbit of Israelite knowledge. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land. To confirm any matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to another. And this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and removed his sandal. So now he has, verse 6, confirmed it verbally. I cannot redeem it. You are the next in line. If you want it, take it. And he takes his shoe off, and he gives it to him to seal the deal. The deal is now made. And so then we can start moving to the next step, which is him acquiring the land and the hand. He gets Naomi's land, he gets Ruth's hand. So verse 9 and 10. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are my witnesses today, and I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today." So that is the official confirmation, and then they confirm it themselves. They say, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman." So then we also, these are very interesting connections here. So we are comparing this, or hopefully comparing this, to Rachel and Leah and to the house of Perez. And so we need to kind of talk about them and who they were. So to start, they confirm it. It's a legal transaction. It's done. Rachel and Leah, they are considered the mothers of the house of Israel. And so Rachel and Leah have 9 of Jacob's 13 children, which I know is kind of confusing to think about. And then the handmaids, I can't remember their names right now. I'd have to flip back and see it. Rachel and Leah have 9 of 13 of Jacob's children, and the handmaids have 4 of 13. Now, realize the 13th one is a daughter. So these present the 12 tribes of Israel. And so they are continuing the lineage. And with promoting those two as kind of like the head mothers, it's also telling them that they hope they achieve wealth and become famous in Bethlehem. And so they want them to build a fruitful legacy, because remember, as we're going to learn near the end of this chapter, this is Jesus' lineage. The son Judah is the one that's going to be the direct descendant, or the direct ancestor of that entire line of Jesus. And so then the elders also say, "May your house be like the house of Perez." So Perez is the son of Judah. And so it's kind of interesting how this happens, because Perez actually means the breaker. And I don't know if you know the story of Perez, but Tamar, who was the woman that had Judah's children, she was giving birth to twins. And so while she's giving birth to twins, the first one sticks his hand out, and they tie a scarlet bow around his finger, so they know that he's the first one that comes out. But then he pulls the hand back in, and then the other twin is technically born first. But because Perez is the one that stuck his hand out first, he was considered the firstborn.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, actually, let me see if I can find it. I do need to correct myself, though. So, what actually happened was, the other twin, not Perez, stuck his hand out first. That's when they put the scarlet thread on his finger. His hand comes back in, and then Perez is born first. And then they realized that the one that had the scarlet finger on their hand was born second. Again, I had the right explanation, definitely wrong order. But his brother Zerah sticks his hand out first. They consider him the firstborn child because they know he has the scarlet thread on his finger. But then Perez is the one that actually is born first. And that's why he's called breaker, because he broke the order. He changed what was supposed to happen. And we see that a lot actually in Genesis, because, as we know, the younger brother always somehow gets over the older brothers. And you can see that a lot through here with a lot of descendants.
Oh yeah, listen, my buddy Will, who watches all of our stuff, he loves the story of Jacob and Esau. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the big prime examples of the younger, and it even states the younger, actually before they're born, it they are told the younger will, or the older will serve the younger, which in that culture, people would have been like, no, it's the opposite way around in that culture of surrounding them. But as we know, the nation of Israel, or the people who would become the nation of Israel, always do things, not, I wouldn't necessarily say polar opposite of the rest of the world, but enough to make them stand out. Even if it was just their customs, how they spoke, or in this case, every time we think of Ruth, how they look. Ruth looked different. At first, she probably acted a little bit different. Spoke different, too. Again, she probably had a different dialect than they did. But they probably all spoke a very similar language around that area.
Which she definitely probably understood.
Yes.
I mean,
enough to survive.
As the Israelites knew who the Moabites were, I imagine the Moabites knew who the Israelites were.
Well, here's the thing. If Israel had an enemy, those enemies knew who Israel was.
And it was pretty much every surrounding area.
Yep. Even to this day.
Because, I mean, you have to remember the Israelites, God is for us. And everybody else was like,
what?
What?
Everyone else, that's the surprise Pikachu meme. God is for us.
we see these blessings. So, we're pretty much, the elders have said, we hope that your family becomes like that of Leah and Rachel and Perez. So, we want you to be fruitful. We want you to multiply. We want you to continue the lineage of Jacob and his family. We also want you to overcome the obstacles and break through to fulfill God's promises. So that's kind of like that connection to Perez that I saw. It was that overcoming, the breaking of the norm, breaking through the obstacles, because, as we would consider it, the older brother should have probably been born first. So I like seeing those connections because they're telling them to do what God says, continue the lineage so that we can see what is to come. And granted, they probably knew where this lineage came from. They probably knew who Boaz was. They probably knew who Boaz's relatives were, who his fathers, who his father, who his father, etc. And so it's very important that we see this and that blessing, because from what we know, Boaz has no kids. As we learned in verse 3, he just wanted love.
Aww.
He wanted love because he was older. And you also have to realize that he probably also understood that if he didn't do something soon-ish, he probably would have no descendants. So this is kind of like, yay Naomi, yay Ruth, but also this is for Boaz. And yes, God does use a Moabite to continue the lineage of Jesus, but if there was nobody there for Boaz, there would be no lineage. And so that leads to the next verses. They get married.
Yay.
And simply put, so we don't have to read this, marriage and a baby.
Yay.
And then the women, this is the interesting part, bless Naomi. So God allows Ruth to conceive, but the women bless Naomi. Think about how interesting that is. And so she gets 5 blessings listed in these verses. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." So, in this situation, she gets the 5 blessings. She has a redeemer, her life is restored, she has a sustainer of old age, there's a continuity of her lineage, and there's love. So we see all 5 of those things in these 2 verses, because Ruth gives birth to a baby named Obed. And so, through all of Naomi's losses, they're all restored through Obed. Without this story happening, granted, there would be a Jesus somehow, but without this happening, we wouldn't get the lineage of Jesus that we know and that had to be fulfilled to ensure that this happened. And so, even though we don't consider Ruth to be a major character, she definitely plays a major part. And her story is one that we need to know to understand. She essentially proves that line that you do not have to be an Israelite to do God's will and to fulfill God's promises. And I just think that's amazing to know that somebody who comes from the Warsh Bowl of the world is somebody who actually is the matriarch.
Well, I think this has been a really good study. Obviously, if we were to do something like Proverbs, this series would be forever long. But I like diving into not necessarily lesser known books, but your typical Sunday school studies, your typical Bible studies come out of a lot of the major things, the major prophets, the kings, the judges, the Gospels. And listen, I'm not this is not meant to downplay any of that, but the whole Bible ought to be read and understood just as equally. And I think that's what I love about this podcast, is that's what we're doing. So, even so much so that I received a message from a pastor in the area that was really thankful that we did this and used it for some insight and information. And I'm grateful for that, and grateful that we can continue this. And starting next week, a little preview, we are moving on to the writings of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the epistles of John, right? So that's where we're heading next. So 3 episodes diving into...
it might be more than 3.
It could be. Well,
the first one's 5 chapters.
Yeah.
I like to talk at least about a chapter for 45 minutes apiece.
Just might happen. By the way, thank you guys for joining in this next episode of Holy Grounds. Again, thank you to Brandon and Coffee with a Twist for allowing us to come chill here for a little bit on a Saturday. It's still cold out, still a lot of snow. So if you're watching this and you're still snowed in, hope you guys are staying safe. And if it's in the middle of the summer and you're watching this, it's cold outside right now. Thank you guys. We'll see you in the next episode.